Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Careers in Science Communication Workshop. My name is Adelita Mendoza. I am a postdoc at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and I am a member of the GSA Communications and Outreach Subcommittee. Right off the bat, we just wanted to let you know that we are recording this seminar. I wanted to say that the Career in Science Communication is the first in a series of workshops centered in science communication. We have assembled a panel of speakers who will share their experiences in their careers as science communicators. When you registered, we ask that you submit questions to our panelists. As for the format of this workshop, we will first ask the questions that you provided until 1 p.m. If you have more questions during the workshop, please ask them in the chat section. We will address them as time allows. At 1 p.m., we'll split you into breakout rooms if you indicated interest during your registration. If you did not indicate a specific breakout room of interest during registration, you can indicate that in the chat as well. So now I'm excited to introduce to you our panelists for this workshop. First, we have Carolyn Hall. Carolyn is a science communicator, instructor, resident ecologist at Work on Water, and is also a professional contemporary dancer. We also have Julia DeMarines, who is an astrobiologist, National Geographic Explorer, and science educator at UC Berkeley. And finally, we have Máté Pálfy, who is a community manager at the preLights at the Company of Biologists in the UK. So now we will have each panelist introduce themselves and discuss their career path. So first we will start with Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm excited to be talking to you all and excited to hear from the other panelists. So I'm Carolyn Hall. As Adelita said, I am I'm a fisheries scientist, actually, that focuses on historical marine ecology, but I'm also a dancer. And so part of my journey has been ways to combine those. And science communication was a really clear way for me to do that, because I learned from the Alan Alda Center. I no longer work there, I now work independently, but their way of teaching was through acting improvisation as well as distilling your message. So how do you talk about what you do in a way that's for any audience, not just the academic world that we are so steeped in and need to exist in. So combining acting, improvisation, and talking the language of science worked really beautifully for me, and I love doing that. The other way that I've been really exploring science communication that is much more, I think, unconventional, but is happening more and more, is actually doing interactive public engagements that are combining artistic practice and embodying data in some way that's outside of reading a paper or hearing a more typical talk. So I'm going to share just a couple of slides about that side of what I do. Okay. Can you guys all see that? Great. So there are two projects I'm going to talk about. This first one is Sunk Shore. Sunk Shore is, as it says, an experiential tour to the climate change future. So the idea here is that we use data from modeling in terms of if the climate goes up a few degrees, if it goes up 2, if it goes up 1.5, if it goes up 3, what can happen to the site that you're in? This is a picture on Governor's Island, so on the shoreline of you can see New Jersey actually, but New York is just over there, and that's the Staten Island Ferry. Let me see if I can move forward here. Okay, what we do with Sunk Shore is we actually take data from the past. So we have people stand and look at a site, close their eyes, and sensorially imagine what that site was like in the past, and we talk them through prompts. By making that data become about the senses, what they see, hear, feel, it actually becomes more real. And we do that with each stage, from the past to the present and to the future. Also, we do it on a local site, so it's about that location, so people can actually apply that data in terms of sea level rise or drought or flooding to that place. And then we ask for people to give us responses. So it does stimulate discussion. We also use props, and this makes it, this embodiment of information I was talking about, it makes it actually physical learning, not just reading or hearing, but putting it in the body. This picture is, we made boats with fabric that people actually had to wear on their shoulders. And the fans became multi-purpose tools that were oars, that were fins for being fish, a variety of things, in order for them to experience what it is to have to be in a boat. What is it to have to use watercraft on a daily basis if we're in a flooded area, which New York would be more prone to as opposed to drought. And also these props can be very simple, but by making them part of a physical experience, it makes the data sink in. For example, these were our way doors. They for our protection for walking in flooded areas in case there are toxic waters. Obviously it's caution tape that we velcroed around people's ankles, but to watch people physically respond to having something on their ankles and thinking about the fact that they could be walking in flooded sewer water changed the way that they responded to how we were talking about data. So that's a tiny bit about sunk shore and climate change shorelines and futures. The other one I have worked on is specifically about my fisheries work, timelines through a fisheye lens. So I have been looking at 400, 500, 600 years of fish and fisheries data in New York City waters. And I wrote out these timelines and put them up around the walls so that people could come into the room and interact with them and read them and really immerse in them. And they're in different themes. So there are fish, and fish is in the middle, that's the green timeline. But then there's politics, there's population, there's weather. There are all these different aspects in terms of what happened in New York City and along the waters. Based on things that happened with fish and fisheries, I would expand out to these other topics so people could make comparisons. And then in these conversations, I realized people had their own experiences with the water. We all do. So I wanted to find a way to record their experiences with the local waters. So I had them draw or write on fabric. And so these are some pictures of people who came through my studio on Governor's Island and drew their responses to their favorite fish or the way they feel about water. And then I did sew these into a quilt. Now this was my first quilt, but here it is. And this is some data from my own historical research that I wrote on fabric, and lots of pictures and thoughts of their own feelings about water and fish and how they depend on and how they interact with their shorelines and what they think about fish. And so you can see right here in the middle, this was one gentleman who was reading the data and he said, wow, what comes to me is when you have it, you don't think about it. You only think about it when it's gone. And this is the kind of, I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. This is the kind of interaction that I found engaging people in an artistic practice around data. They start thinking further about beyond just what's the information. They start to think about how they feel about it. So that's one way that I've also worked science communication into what I'm doing. And I will stop there and pass this on to, I think, back to Adelita. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Carolyn, for the introduction. That was amazing. That is so creative. So next, we're going to roll on to Julia DeMarines, and she's going to give a small presentation about her stuff.
Thanks, and thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Currently, I'm in Oakland, California, and just as a heads up, I am not a morning person. I study space. Space happens at nighttime, so forgive me if I'm choppy. So let me go ahead and just share my screen. I'm definitely a visual learner, so I'm going to be hurling images at you, and hopefully it'll be a lot of fun. Okay. So I have built up a lot of affiliations over time. And is this coming through? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I see it.
Great. Okay. And I'm not going to be talking about all of them, but I wanted to talk about a few things today. I use the cosmic perspective in my communication. I think communicating the kind of your place in space is a really nice hook. So I really like to use big questions and sometimes humor to inspire people of all ages to really think about their place in the context of not only like our planet, our solar system, but our universe. And I'm just going to start with this. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Jill Tarter. We, all of us, are what happens when a primordial mixture of hydrogen and helium evolves for so long that it begins to ask where it came from. So today what I'm going to talk about, just a little context about my research for a few moments, strange life experiences that I've brought into, I've brought outreach into science, and I've used some of these cool experiences in my outreach. Some informal education and some science communication that I've done. So my research is involved with finding aliens. Has anyone seen the movie Contact? So I work at a group called Berkeley SETI, where we are literally scanning the skies to see if there's any signs of extraterrestrial technology, which is really cool. When you're a kid, your favorite things are aliens and dinosaurs. So it's really cool to be working in this field because it's so fun for people to think about. The group I work for is called Breakthrough Listen, and it's at UC Berkeley. So in the field of astrobiology, we're all looking for exoplanets, planets that orbit other stars, or excuse me, stars that aren't our own. But we also, in the field that I work in, we're looking for not just exoplanets, but things that are communicating. So we are also communicating, and just a brief about my research, I'm looking for our signals that are leaving Earth and being bounced off the moon to get a sense of what we sound like to an alien. So that's kind of what I'm doing for my PhD at Berkeley. And I'm going to talk briefly about some strange life experiences that I've done some used in outreach. So I had the great privilege of pretending to live like an astronaut on the Mars Desert Research Station. And just to show you some cool photos that came out of that experience, got to live in this habitat where it really looked like Mars. So that was just a cool experience. And I'll show you a little bit more of how I use that in outreach. It got actually published in the Scholastic magazine, and I thought I threw a picture in there. But I also had the opportunity to live and work on a research vessel looking at hydrothermal sea vents, and I was a blogger on that expedition. And then another ship, here is some background noise. I don't know if there's someone that's, I don't know if anyone else hears that, but just wanted to see if someone could check on that. Okay. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so I got to write a article in the Scholastic magazine, which when I was a kid, that was like the coolest thing ever. So it's so cool to be a role model for the next generation. There we go. Okay, so got to work and do blogging and communication on 2 research vessels. Very cool. And communicate the importance of these expeditions to the public. So some informal education that I've done. I've had a strange career path, and I don't want to take up too much more time. I think I'm getting towards the end. I was an informal educator for 4 years at the Chabot Space and Science Center. And through that, was able to land some fellowships with National Geographic and some grant funding, where I got to go to the Galapagos and use that experience to create educational material, trying to bridge the geology of the Galapagos and compare it, these islands as their own ecosystems, kind of like their own exoplanets. And I used that to create a lesson plan that I worked with my friend Logan, who also lives in Oakland, and enacted in her classroom. Two other projects I'm going to quickly talk about in the next 2 minutes. The Ad Astra Academy is a group of scientists that take kind of like our free time, and we go to underserved communities throughout the world that invite us to use this hook of space science to inspire students to discover opportunities. And we do a lot of field trips and hands-on activities and inquiry-based learning. And if anyone's interested in that sort of stuff, come join me in the breakout room after. So we've done 4 locations, or I guess 5, 2 in Nigeria, 1 in Bangladesh, Oakland, California, and Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And just some pictures, just because it's kind of fun to see different cultures throughout the world learning. So just some field trips that we've got to go on, and some hands-on activities with our scientists, our budding scientists in Nigeria. Okay, and last thing I'm going to talk about in the next minute is some science communication that I've done on the side. So I moved around a lot, and I lived in Denver for a few years, and I didn't have a ton of community there. And anytime I try and go make community, I tell everyone I'm an astrobiologist, and I'd have to explain what I did over and over and over. And I'm a little bit of an introvert, so it got a little bit too much. So I said, all right, everyone who's interested in this, come to this bar, and I'll just talk space at you. And it became this monthly event that involved the community called Space in Your Face. And we have this fun logo here. And it's a partnership with Blue Marble Space, a nonprofit institution. And we involved the local community, as I mentioned. So we got singers, artists, dancers, scientists. People would approach me and say, hey, I'm a budding improv or comedian, and I want to do a sketch with you. So we had a lot of fun community members just being involved that were interested in space. And it was just a ton of fun. We do these silly sketches, and there's drinking involved if you wanted. And it was just a lot of fun. Now here in Oakland, I am still doing it, but I'm still building a community. So I've been reaching out to local artists at open mic nights to collaborate. And just some cool photos, even incorporated a burlesque dancer into exoplanet detection. So I think that concludes what I wanted to talk about. Hopefully I excited you for some of these things, and I don't want to take up more of my time or more of your time. So I will pass on the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. That was amazing. You're doing some very cool work. So next, we'd like to hear from Máté Pálfy.
Okay, can you just confirm that you can see my screen all right? Oops.
Yes.
Okay, so thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really excited to talk here. I'm afraid my presentation won't have so many cool pictures as before. But before I start, I just want to mention that I work at the Company of Biologists, which is a not-for-profit publisher. Not-for-profit means that a lot of the surplus we make, we give it back to the community. So we have all kinds of, we give out a lot of travel grants and fellowships. So if you're interested, have a look there. And apart from the 5 journals that we run, we also have 3 community sites. And I'm the community manager of one of them, which I'll talk about in a minute. But just a little bit of background of how I got into a science communication related job. So I did my bachelor's in my hometown in Budapest, and then did a master's project in cell biology. And then went on to Germany to do a PhD in gene regulation. And when I think back, kind of what was very obvious all along the way is that the thing I enjoyed most was really writing and reading, and also giving feedback to other people about their work. So also, for example, during my PhD, when I broke my leg and was out of the lab for over 2 months, I could have done a lot of, learn about coding and data analysis a bit more, but instead I decided to, take on writing a review, and that was really what excited me the most. So this is how it became quite obvious after my PhD that I should look for a career option that involves some form of scientific writing and communication. Now, of course, just writing research papers and reviews and grants, it won't really make you stand out. But I think it's really useful when you aim for a job in Cycom is to do other stuff, as also mentioned in the previous presentation. So I did some outreach at local schools. So there was a school project where we went and showcased some model organisms we do our research on. I also gave a presentation at our institute to a lay audience, and even just really small things like writing news pieces on our lab website. I think these can also all be really helpful. And there's of course tons of opportunities out there to try yourself out, like going to science festivals. Many institutes have these long night of science types of events. Or now that of course we can't really go to labs anymore, there's projects like Skype a Scientist where you can reach out to high school students through Skype, or there's all different kinds of activities you can do. And if you're really interested in this writing aspect, I think it's important that you already start writing stuff outside of really your research project, and really try different types of styles. So I want to just talk about the project I'm managing, which is called preLights, which I think is also a nice opportunity if anybody's interested to really hone their writing skills and have a feel for science communication. So just basically the very core of this project are early career researchers. So we have now over 250 PhD students and postdocs, and their main job is to scan the preprint literature. So I guess most of you know what preprints are. They're manuscripts that are deposited on servers before undergoing formal peer review and being published in a formal journal. So they scan servers like bioRxiv and pick preprints they find are really interesting to highlight to the community. And they basically write like a news and views type of article, a digest of the work, and also reach out to authors and have a small discussion about the work. So just an example of how such a preLight looks like. We asked these early career researchers to write a really catchy, engaging summary of the work, and this is also what then gets tweeted on our site. And they give a bit of background to the work and digest the main results of the preprint. And what's also really important is we really encourage them to give their personal take on why this work is important and why they chose this preprint to highlight. And as mentioned, they then ask questions to the authors and email these questions, and the responses are then posted also at the end of this preLight. I think why it's also really useful for these researchers is that, so we have a community site where they can all put up their own profile. And basically, when you click on it, you see all the posts they've written. So it's really a portfolio of all their work. And I think it's also important, even if, of course, if you're not involved in this, to start building your portfolio of things you're getting involved in. So then when you start applying to jobs, you already, you don't have to think too hard of all the things that you've done outside of your main research. And finally, just really briefly about what my role is as community manager, since I just talked about what the community members do in terms of writing. This is a super diverse role, and when I was starting applying for positions, I didn't even know that community management is really a thing. But I think more and more organizations realize that often the community is really at the core of the things they're doing. So it's really useful to have a person coordinating this, and often the community manager really evolves this role, or they shape what they do. So obviously a big part is building the community and supporting them. I, for example, do interviews with them, asking about their research. I try to promote the platform in different ways. So I run social media channels. And also, of course, often we want to try new things on the site, and then together with the community, there's things we can evolve. There's also, of course, often elements of writing. I write blog posts about the site, or often we have to do reports to satisfy our board. And in general, there's just a lot of communication happening with these early career researchers. We have a very active Slack channel where people also give feedback on each other's writing. So if anybody's interested, so I have to stress this is really intended for researchers, so for the science community. So this is not that type of public engagement. But I think even if you're thinking of moving to that kind of Cycom, it can be a really useful skill to try this type of writing. So I think that's the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Máté. That was very interesting. And now I think I'm going to investigate preLights. Cool. So now that we've had all of our panelists speak about their career paths, we're going to start getting into the questions that you have asked. So the first question that we have here is, how did you start building a network for your Cycom career? And this can go to anyone.
Okay, I'll go. For me, building my network was kind of a mix between taking the science network that I was already involved with throughout my career and just sometimes cold calling and trying to create a welcoming space for people to join in the case of Space in Your Face. So it was a mix of like bringing the contacts that I had in my science career and just getting to know the local community that I lived in and trying to create spaces for those to interact. So sometimes that involved cold calling artists that I've never met before. Sometimes it involved wrangling a friend who was in town for a conference to speak at one of these events. But really the impetus is just being accessible, having science be accessible in all avenues. So I think that's my answer.
I'll go ahead because it's actually, Julia, I have similarities to what you did. I mean, my first network was actually through connections through graduate school and through folks that I met at conferences and such like that who were interested in talking about science in different ways. And just having conversations about what is that to talk about science, not in an academic state. And then in terms of the further expansion, so that got me into the Alda Center and that sort of more formal training. But the artistic expansion and public engagement and connecting artists and scientists, that was really through my dance class, because I found a lot of folks who were really curious. What is a fisheries scientist? What's a historical ecologist? What the heck are you doing? And in order to explain to them, I had to make it tangible. I had to make it much more accessible in a way that was beyond, want to read my thesis? Want to read a published paper? And so actually the interest came, the more I talked about it in a way that was with communities that weren't of my expertise, the more I realized there is a lot of interest out there, kind of like what you were saying, Julia. Like you could cold call or you could have a conversation and suddenly you have a burlesque dancer who wants to dance about space. Like that's actually what I have found is if you open yourself up to having conversations with parts of the population that aren't your usual scientific realm, you will find interest. And so that has just grown. And I'm now, the Works on Water organization I'm with are artists who are working on water and water issues. And so I actually spend time connecting them with others and trying to get scientists to come in and talk to them about more of their details about something that might influence their work as well. So it's a two-way exchange and it's really rich. And it's not all my science, which I love. Máté, I pass to you.
Yeah, I think I don't have so much to add. Also, obviously, like my job is quite different, so I can more talk about community building and how to attract early career researchers to write on this platform. So we of course use a lot of social media, so that's where a lot of academics are. So that's that's I think the easiest way to attract people. Of course, we also try to go to institutes or get invited to conferences and then give short presentations about this platform. And really just, after we have a base of early career research, it just, starts spreading and by word of mouth or, people invite their friends to join and or their colleagues. And we also try to promote it through our journal. So I mentioned we have 5 journals in the Company of Biologists. So we also try to promote, on the journal web pages, sometimes these early career researchers and, the work they do on preLights. So there's, different sorts of ways we try to, get more attention.
Great. Thank you all for your responses. I think that all of you have just really shown that inspiration can come from anywhere, right? Okay, so we have another question, and this one is for Máté specifically. And the question is, apart from becoming involved in reviewing preprints, do you have any other suggestions for early career reviewers to become involved in the peer review process?
Yeah, so I think recently there's been trials by some journals where they try to build an early career researcher base. So I think more and more people are realizing that, peer review is often done by, or at least, senior scientists are asked to do peer review, and the system is just getting saturated. And anyways, what often happens is that the PIs then pass on the papers to the students. So it would make a lot of sense to directly contact, for example, postdocs for peer review. So I think the advice that people usually say is, if you really want to get involved, just email journals and tell them that, this is my topic of expertise and I'd really like to review. Another option is, of course, to talk to your PI and tell them that you would, really like to co-review a paper with them. So during my PhD, I think I reviewed like 6 papers because my PI knew that I really enjoy doing this kind of work. And now also journals often have, ways to acknowledge reviews by postdocs, for example. PIs often have to fill out if this review was done by some colleague in their lab. So there's definitely, ways to get involved in peer review.
Great, thanks. Okay, so the next question is from someone who would like to know if you have any tips for how to find a career in Cycom, and this can go to anybody.
I think there are many ways into science communication. If you're more interested in becoming a facilitator or instructor, in that sense, there are various institutes and many scientific community groups that provide science communication and training. So the more formal, in terms of the more formal sense of teaching it and immersing yourself in it, there are a number of organizations, and I'm sure we could put a list between the group of us, we could put a list together. But other tips, honestly, if you're interested in doing it, for me, what I found is you just start talking to people who aren't in your scientific community, and start and ask about what libraries might have programs, or what bars, like what Julia was saying. There are a lot of talk science in bars, have a beer and talk science. There are a lot of outreach, community outreach organizations through parks, through libraries, through botanical gardens, through museums. And they've been doing them outdoors during COVID. So, once we were allowed to be outside. So they have continued. It's just usually finding organizations that host such kind of talks can be a great way in. Just say, I want to do it.
Just wanted to echo what Carolyn said.
Great, thank you.
That there's like other, in addition to building your own community with the people you just physically interact with, there's you can start your own project, which is something that I did just because you want to get your science out there, or practice your skills. Museums, I'm not sure if Carolyn mentioned it, she mentioned libraries, but museums, there's a ton of that sort of stuff going on, and there's often volunteer opportunities if you just want to try to see if that's a career path that you're interested in. And there's also, I think Máté mentioned it in one of his slides, but there's online programs called like Skype a Scientist. There's one called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. a variety of programs like that that you can become available to students if they are interested in learning about your subject.
If I just a little bit talk about the writing part of Cycom, it's obviously way more easy in the times of COVID also. There's no restrictions on meeting up people, and often it can be a bit daunting to starting a blog yourself. You might think that you're not going to be able to carry on writing very regularly, but there are a lot of platforms where, for example, there's one called The Conversation, where they actively want academic researchers to write about science for them. Or even within our publisher, we have two community sites: The Node, which is for developmental biologists, and Focal Plane, which is intended for people doing stuff with microscopy. They're all sites where they really welcome people to write a blog post about their research or something cool that they saw. And there's, I think that you just have to look around, and there's a lot of places to write about science without having to necessarily start a whole new website by yourself.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a really good question here, and this goes to everyone. How have you and or the organizations you work with adjusted Cycom efforts during the pandemic? Any suggestions for those starting out during this time?
I'll jump in. So at least for Space in Your Face, I started doing them online, and I offered one for school, for K through 12 students, more like K through 3 students, just weekly online on Zoom, where I don't do it anymore just because I started a PhD program, but offering to create, cool interactive short engagements with school kids is a great way to start right now, because it's such a trying time for families and for students and for parents, for everyone really. But to offer perhaps just your family friends or who have students would be a really cool way to be practicing your science communication online right now, because we can't do anything in person. So that would be my suggestion, is try a science outreach event online. And for the Space in Your Face for adults, we've had an evening one where we brought in scientists who zoomed in from all over the world, and we had a scavenger hunt and all sorts of fun interactive things for that community. And it worked pretty well. Of course, it's not the same as being in person, but it's a fun opportunity to be creative in these trying times. So encourage everyone to try something new, even if it is online.
I can only just echo what Julia was saying, so I completely agree. And I think there's also more and more, these interactive tools coming out that try to give you a more like real life interacting experience. So our company has used a specific tool called Remo, which is really basically you have tables around, people can sit at tables, you can jump from table to table. It's trying to recreate, how you would meet up at a conference center. So, and I think it's worth looking around and try to find that perfect tool for your type of event you would like to organize.
I'm going to echo both Julia and Máté, but also something that Works on Water has done. We just finished a weekly series called Walking the Edge, where we had artists who were thinking about water and interacting with water, and they would take over Instagram for a week and make posts that had some sort of visualization associated with their art, but then also had their musings or their thoughts about what access to the water means to them, what issues with the water they have in their neighborhoods. It was New York based. But so using a platform like Instagram, finding, I forget what you said the name was, Máté, but I know there's like on Slack, you can have multiple channels and bounce around. There are different platforms where you can be in a big group and go to smaller groups pretty easily. The other thing for Sunk Shore, we did video shorts. So we did a tour. We did a shoreline tour this summer, but we did it through video shorts and did that over social media and got reactions to it that way. So yeah, it really is a time of creativity. There are a lot of virtual platforms. If it's warm enough and can be socially distanced to be outside, you can still do walks or interactions in that way. It depends on what your science is. It depends on what kind of conversation you want to have. But the creativity on virtual platforms is exploding. And it really is a time to play with that and to reach out. I love the weekly teaching of young kids. It's a great idea.
Good. Okay, our next question is related to publishing your work. So let's say you have written and published a blog post somewhere, and apart from sharing it on Twitter, how do you reach out to a broader network so that you can reach a larger audience? This question can go to everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. I guess the somewhere is quite an important part. So I would recommend to try to find a platform that is read by many people. Obviously, often these platforms also have their own Twitter account, so that if they have tens of thousands of followers, it doesn't matter if you're not so big on Twitter, it will reach a lot of people. But I agree, it is hard when you start out to get your audience, and I think you just have to also be patient that if you do it regularly, people will discover your work, and then if you're regularly writing, you're going to grow your audience over time.
Okay. Next question. What challenges, if any, did you face while entering into the science communication field? This question is for anyone as well.
Julia, you mentioned something earlier, and that about being introverted. And it's funny to say, but yeah, even being a dancer and being so involved in public engagement, I'm also introverted. So I think part of the challenge is, what is your energy to constantly engage? Because it does take a lot. But I was passionate about talking about science to people who were interested but who didn't understand. And so I think the challenge was learning that their excitement and their energy would feed me. And once I felt that, I could get over that fear of not wanting to put myself out there. And we already sort of talked about some of the other challenges, like how do you find your audiences? How do you create situations to invite audiences towards you? And as we've all said, there are different approaches to that, whether it's through writing or whether it's through creating your own show, or whether it's through joining an organization that reaches out through public engagement. It helps to find a platform that serves you and your type of communication. I'm going to leave it there because I'm sure Julia and Máté can add on.
Okay, I'll just piggyback a little bit. I just want to echo everything Carolyn said, and just to add some additional challenges. So my career has gone from being in science to taking a pause from that and being my primary job as an informal educator. And something that I just wanted to point out is that prior to that experience, I was doing a ton of outreach and thinking I had a really good grasp on it, but I realized how much I actually had to learn about pedagogy and interacting in appropriate ways, and reaching different types of learners, and neural diversity, and cultural considerations, the whole gamut. There's so much that goes into having a really effective science communication presence that's you don't learn really, I don't mean to say that it's not talked about in science, but it's certainly not an impetus or a primary focus. And I have done a ton of workshops to learn some of these techniques and tools that I had not experienced even doing a ton of science outreach. So I would really recommend some online training. National Geographic has some free education resources. You can become a certified educator for free with them. So that's just one I wanted to mention. And there's a lot of fellowships, one through AGU called Sharing Science, where they do some workshops that you can apply for. So that I would recommend to learn about different ways to communicate science effectively. And I would say for me, that's been a humbling experience and quite a challenge. When I jumped into a classroom with K through 12 students and I was like, let's talk about spectroscopy, and their eyes glaze over and I'm like, what do you mean you're not interested? And it's like, they're interested, but you can't talk about these big terms. There's a lot that you have to, some obstacle courses that you have to take your science to and bend them in a way that's appropriate for your audience. So that's just something I really wanted to emphasize, that it's not, no matter how much of an egghead you are, there's science communication and education is something that people who are educators, they spend their whole lives perfecting. And I would just say, be humble entering that field, and be prepared to unlearn. Yeah, and that's all I'll say.
Yeah, so I also have the same experience with that, you know, especially when you enter something like community management, there is no formal training where you basically, you know, have to learn it on the spot by yourself. And often what also might sound a bit weird is that, you know, in this role, it's actually quite a lonely role. So you wouldn't, you know, imagine when you're a community manager. Of course, you have the whole community, but a lot of the communication is, of course, through, you know, Slack or email. And basically, you're kind of on your own. So I think that was something a bit, you know, challenging for me. Luckily, there is also a science community manager Slack, where there's, you know, trying to gather a group of, you know, everybody who's doing something related to science community management. And that's also really an excellent platform to learn from each other. So, you know, often you'll be the only community manager in your organization, but it's really useful to reach out to, you know, people who are doing a little bit similar things in other organizations and, you know, learn together about, you know, what works, what doesn't work. So that would be my advice. If you, also if you, you know, decide to do something Cycom, you know, very focused on writing can also often, you know, feel like a bit of a lonely, you know, job. So also there, I think it's important to find your network who you can learn from.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. How do I feel more confident with the remote delivery of content? And this is for anyone.
I'll just jump in real quick and just say practice makes perfect. I think just more exposure that you have and more practice, you'll, as Máté was saying, it can be a lonely experience, but if you keep practicing at something, you will learn from that experience. You'll learn what works, what doesn't. I also encourage for self-feedback to have anonymous polls to do, if it's available to you, to do pre and post surveys to see your impact on your audience. Things like that, like surveys and polls, and checking in with your audience to see how it works, or how you are working for them.
Great suggestion. I also would recommend finding another person who's also interested in trying virtual platforms and experimenting together. Like finding a creative partner, even if their science is different, even if their approach is different, just having someone to bounce ideas off of and try things with can be really helpful.
And finally, maybe just add that, don't be afraid to fail. Also, since, we're just, a few months into this pandemic where everybody had to switch to virtual working. So it's, everybody's used to, if there's technical glitches or something's not working out perfectly, people are going to be fine with that. So you don't have to worry too much about these kind of things.
Just wanted to add one more anecdote here. What Máté was just saying is that when I was doing the Space in Your Face for kids, there was this whole learning process of trying to wrangle students on a new platform. It was just chaos. And it took a long, long time to actually find the right way to make sure students don't unmute and say hi to their friends across Zoom. So expect pandemonium, but you will get through it, and don't be afraid of it, because it can be intimidating, but keep at it.
Great, so I think we have time for one more question. And we have, how do we know which piece of data will make the most impact on the public? I guess you could think, of anything that you're communicating. What do you think is going to stick the most with your audience?
I think I would just emphasize the importance of storytelling. So I think, it's really key to try to tell a really interesting story. And then even if, something that might not seem super relevant to everybody, I think people are going to enjoy it and it will really stick. So, try to perfect your storytelling. That would be my advice.
Yes to the storytelling. Also, for me, it's how do you make it local? How do you make it in the realm of the people who you're talking to about what they care about or what they're familiar with? That seems to really bring data home to them if they can apply it to where they're living or what they care about. Their values, their families, their environment.
I don't have too much more to add from what Carolyn and Máté were saying, but just, make it relevant and really explain the importance in the bigger context of, in my case, the universe. Well, everyone's case, the universe. So I think really taking your tiny little niche science and being like, well, why is the reproductive organs of snails important? Well, let's really put it in context and its bigger implications. So that I think it does involve storytelling as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'd like to thank you all for all of your time and the wonderful answers that you provided for all of us. So now in the workshop, we would like to transition over to the breakout rooms. We had a slight technical difficulty. So what we're doing is providing a link in the chat for you all, for those who are interested in transitioning to the breakout rooms, to click on that link so that you can be moved over to the breakout room. So in closing, I would like to say that on behalf of GSA and the GSA Communications and Outreach Subcommittee, we want to thank you for your interest and participation. If you enjoyed this workshop, stay tuned because there are more coming. In the meantime, the GSA Career Development Subcommittee will be organizing a workshop on November 4th about faculty positions at primarily undergraduate institutions. You can read more about this link that we are sharing in the chat. We invite you to stay to chat with our panelists further in the breakout rooms so that you can engage with your questions further. Have a nice day and live long and prosper.